Revolution Fancast episode 11, special interview, Davidson Scott, EMP expert.
It's happening, isn't it?
It's going to turn off and it will never, ever turn back on.
Welcome back to Revolution Fancast. This is a different type of episode. You may be aware, and if you're not, the season is over. Episode 10 is in the can, and there's a 4-month hiatus between now and when Revolution comes back on at the end of March. And we decided and promised that we would not go away during this hiatus, that we were going to continue to broadcast. However, we're going to change our focus just a bit and actually start talking with experts that know something about power down situations, grids going down, electromagnetic pulse, solar weather, which we are entering the solar maximus, which is the phase where there's lots and lots of solar activity from the sun, which could be a threat to the U.S. and to the world, actually. And so this week, we're bringing on a fellow by the name of Davidson Scott. He is an EMP expert, and he's done tons of consulting work. He's helped from individual private citizens. So let's get to it. Okay, guys, we have Davidson Scott, MSPE, EMP Electromagnetics Consultant on the line. And I'm Jake, and we've got the engineer in the house. Everybody say hello.
Greetings.
All right. Hi. Davidson is at a busy coffee house / Wi-Fi. And is that right? And you've got...
That's right. I apologize for any excess background noise.
But anyway, we'll suffer through it because it's better than having an EMP hit and not hearing anything. But Davidson specializes in electromagnetics, including EMP, electromagnetic pulse, effects, electromagnetic interference, it's EMI, RFI, radio frequency interference, and EMF, electromagnetic field effects, and human safety. He earned an MS degree in systems engineering from Virginia Tech and has a BSEE from Virginia Military Institute. He's also worked in electromagnetics for most of nearly his 30-year career. That includes his military service, flight testing of low observable platforms, wireless design, and electromagnetic EMP consulting around the world. Davidson is a registered professional engineer in many states and regularly consults in all areas of electromagnetics. Now, I had erroneously stated that he was an employee of Hardened Structures, but that's how I got connected to him. Hardened Structures referred me to him. I find out that he consults with Hardened Structures regularly. His projected experience and project experience includes numerous projects domestically for the DoD, industrial concerns, and private citizens. Now, around the world, he's consulted for EMP concerned countries like Israel and South Korea on aspects of hardening their defense and also their civil infrastructure. Davidson is here to try to help remove the hype and describe the nature of the threat and how to assist individuals who have a concern about EMP and developing solutions that will actually work for him. So we'll have all his information up on the site, and we'll have links to his any websites and information. We'll put this bio up there as well, and I'm sure you probably wouldn't mind if people contact you about this subject.
Not at all.
Great. So we've got some talking points here, Davidson. I'd like to ask you a few things. For example, let's start out with electromagnetic pulse, EMP. What is it and what is it not?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. I always enjoy talking about the subject, and it's refreshing to run into a couple of guys that are, you guys seem to have the same objective as I do. A lot of people are concerned about the issue, and factual information is sometimes difficult to come by. And I'm going to do my best to provide the facts as I see them, and hopefully we'll get some useful information disseminated. But the EMP effect was basically discovered during nuclear testing in the 50s and 60s. It wasn't specifically expected, at least not at the levels that it was experienced. Instrumentation for nuclear tests was generally hardwired back in the day, and much of this instrumentation and cabling was destroyed in the aftermath of a nuclear detonation. So they lost a lot of data, and they were trying to figure out what was going on. And as they were figuring this out, they realized that this was a potentially exploitable phenomenon, and it became classified for many years.
Kind of like the show it's kind of like the show where they.
What's it?
It's kind of like on the show.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know, but they were actually trying to make clean green energy, and they came up with a device that could shut the power off. So the military always looks for ways to exploit that kind of thing.
Well, I mean, exactly. It's obviously the fictional scenario in Revolution, bears out in real life when you discover phenomenon that can impact civil infrastructure. Oftentimes, it becomes classified. But one of the nuclear tests that's got a lot of attention in the U.S. is Starfish Prime, which was as you know, is a nuclear test, atmospheric nuclear test that resulted in some damage to streetlights in Honolulu, Hawaii. And
that was some 900 miles away, I hear.
Exactly. Now, you can argue about how damaging the EMP effect really was with Starfish Prime. Knocking out some street lights and a few other minor things. But a more dramatic example is some of the Russian nuclear tests. There's one in particular termed Test 184, which is the big one in Kazakhstan, where they blew out an underground power line that was about 600 miles long. And they also took out a telephone communications cable, tripped all the breakers along the path in the detonation zone, or at least the EMP effect zone, and allegedly also caused a severe power plant fire. And anecdotally, we're told that it also had damaged diesel gensets, but they didn't discover that until they fired them up sometime later. So, so those are the most often cited tests. But there's still a good deal of classified information out there that is yet to be released. But the hemp effect itself is now out in the public domain, and the military standards that govern that are indeed unclassified. You can download them and read them yourself. But the three main features of a nuclear EMP. It's sort of a three-pronged event. The first one, the initial pulse, they call it an E1, is where the broadband radio frequency pulse. That's sort of the Hollywood version of an EMP, but in reality, that's a very broadband pulse that goes down as low as 10 kilohertz, which is way lower than even the lowest AM radio band. And it reaches all the way up to 1 gigahertz, which is a little bit higher than some of the initial cell phone frequencies. And this is a nanosecond phenomenon. So it happens in 10 to the minus ninth seconds, that range of time, and it reaches up to 50,000 volts per meter for the EMP pulse. To give you an example, a typical broadcast station, if you're right up to it, you may be 10 volts per meter or even lower. So we're looking at several orders of magnitude higher in field strength. The second part of an EMP is the secondary pulse is the E2 is similar to a lightning strike, and the mitigation for that is similar to lightning mitigation, and we've got a pretty good handle on that. So I mean that's a concern in combination with other things, but we know how to mitigate that. The third pulse is an E3, which is basically the effect of a nuclear fireball and debris from the fireball interacting with the geomagnetic field and causing voltages to be induced at very low frequencies that efficiently couple with power lines, pipelines, and other long structures. And it's similar to a solar EMP that we can discuss next if you'd like. But you have any comments or questions on that?
Well, I don't have any questions yet. I've got a few questions, but I think I'll save them to when you get to the Hollywood part of what's true and what's myth, and I'll wait for that. But we'll just go ahead and let you discuss. Unless engineer, you got a question?
Let's move ahead. I like it.
Okay.
Well, great. Well, let's talk about the solar EMP now. With the solar maximum arriving next year, and certainly we're in the time period where solar maximum effects could even occur any day. The solar EMP is basically when a solar flare, coronal mass ejection, just happens to be directed towards the Earth or pretty close to it. And when this reaches the Earth, and we generally have warning now, you had mentioned some satellites, and we have good intel on solar activity now that we've unprecedented. A decade or more ago, we didn't have that. But when this solar flare reaches the Earth, it deflects the geomagnetic field, much like an E3 nuclear event. And then induces energy at low frequencies. So it's important to note, and it's often misunderstood, that there's no E1, no radio frequency event, and no lightning strike-like event in a solar EMP. So as we go on to discuss this, it's important to note that for solar EMP, no Faraday cage is necessary, and no EMP protected space is required for a solar EMP. It wouldn't do you any good.
So what you're saying is solar EMP won't take out individual gadgets, cell phones and computers and things of that nature like a nuclear EMP? No,
it won't. To the extent that it does damage them, it would come through the power line. If certain elements of the power grid failed, it's possible for them to send transients down the line that may cause trouble that way. But it's certainly not a direct event. It would be a secondary event if it's damaged, and if it's not plugged in, it's not going to get damaged by a solar EMP.
But unless it's battery operated and you can solar charge it, that sort of thing, the fact that the danger, the threat is that the grid goes down, so you don't have power to power these gadgets anyway.
That's right, exactly. You had mentioned in the your previous episode that about the Boeing test in Utah test and training range, and I think that's a good, that press release and some of the video was pretty interesting, and it's worth mentioning here. What we saw in that test was the computers being turned off, a missile flying over and sending a radio frequency pulse down to turn them off. It's very interesting, but it's hard to tell just how relevant this capability is, because we don't know a whole lot about the test environment, and that's obviously classified. But it did appear that the computers they used were pretty old, and it's unknown whether those computers were functional, just needed to be rebooted. So it would be interesting to know that information, and that would give us a little bit more idea of how significant that particular capability is. But it is an actual threat, and it is relevant. And an airborne threat is extremely relevant because you can get a very large coverage area with a device that can generate an EMP, a non-nuclear EMP, and it could be something very significant.
Well, I find it interesting that that in that press release they said that they had to destroy the UAV, the vehicle that they used. I thought, why would you have to destroy that? Unless there was something maybe they're wanting to hide, but I would think you'd want to use that over and over.
Well, it is, it is possible to not destroy the UAV and continue to emit these pulses. So, it's going to vary by device. What type of device are they using? How are they employing it? What kind of an antenna are they using? And generally, these type of devices are higher frequency than a nuclear HEMP. I had mentioned that a nuclear HEMP generally has a top end of around 1 gigahertz. One of these devices might be much faster, denoting a higher frequency content. So maybe around 5 gigahertz. It'll vary by device, and certainly van-based, man-made, non-nuclear EMPs against, say, major data centers or communication nodes would also be a relevant issue.
If anybody's interested, he's talking about the CHAMP system, previously the Boeing test. If you go to episode 6 of Revolution Fancast, and there is a link that says CHAMP, you can learn more about that particular system.
Yeah. So really that takes us to sort of the Hollywood EMP. Sort of the Hollywood version of it is that everything gets taken out, and that's sort of analogous to what's going on in the show Revolution, which I do enjoy watching myself. The Hollywood likes to depict the everything goes out scenario in an EMP. There are a lot of movies and things, but it's not likely that everything would go out. I mean, wristwatches, small electronics would be too small to couple any significant energy. We do know that the EMP Commission ran some tests that showed that vehicles would be, for a large part, not necessarily taken out, maybe damaged but still functional.
And why is that? Because there is that contention that if E1 takes out a electronics that has an IC chip, and every modern car from 1990
probably in the late 80s, probably
on up has an ECU, an electronic computer unit. I guess that's what it stands for.
ECM, I think is what
ECM module. Yeah. And why wouldn't it take those things out? I mean, they do have the same kind of copper leads that you say, an IC chip in a cell phone, or maybe some other, or am I missing something there?
No, well, generally the electronics in automobiles has a little bit tougher standard to live by than typical consumer electronics. They're going to be subjected to static discharges and and they are generally tested to a certain extent in electromagnetic interference environments. So some of it, I don't know exactly, but the reason, but some of it is likely to be due to some elements of electromagnetic hardness are in the design. Now, I want to also caveat the EMP Commission report. We don't know how relevant the tests that they undertook would be to actual, the modern EMP device, whether it's a directed energy non-nuclear device or a high-altitude electromagnetic pulse. But there's some, we can talk about this later, but there's some hope that we'll have a facility and some data to actually get some good information on how vehicles will be impacted in a non-military, a non-government facility is being constructed to do just this thing, and it's an interesting development, and I don't want to go into too much detail, but they're ramping up their operations, and it's going to be interesting to see the data that comes out of that.
I think, Davidson, one of the other things that accounts for some of the variability in the survival or non-survival is just the statistical nature of where all the devices are at the particular moment that a HEMP would take off. So, if your car was in a underground parking garage versus being sitting on the top of the garage, or all the different ways that the actual metal of the surface of the vehicle itself could be positioned. It's going to create more or less. It'll create some focusing or cancellation. So it's very much a luck of the draw to a large extent.
Well, you're absolutely right. You may have two identical automobiles, one parked north-south, one parked east-west,
yes,
and one might survive and one might not. Mm-hmm. And same goes for any electronics that you have. A lot of it depends on exactly when where the pulse comes from, what its particular characteristics are, and so just because one device dies doesn't mean that every device dies. So that's a very good point. Very, very relevant.
Well, let me ask you this: we're basing these or postulating that this would happen, maybe based on the technology that we're aware of. Maybe, and you'll get into this later with military standard 188-125. But what about maybe the idea that, and the engineer has discovered this, that there may be EMP weapons now that devoted specifically to EMP that might be twice as
the super EMP concept. Have you run across that yet?
Yes, I have. And the only thing I can tell you about that is any nuclear device that has any sort of enhancement immediately goes into the realm of highly classified. So yep. There's nothing that you can discuss beyond that.
Mm-hmm. The only thing that I had seen that was out in the clear, the Impact America group had a DVD basically that alluded to that in several, I believe, congressional documents, but obviously they stated nothing about what that was involved in. There's some speculation about directed energy, and that really begins to get into the zone that you're talking about there when you try to talk about sending neutrons in one direction versus in an omnidirectional circumstance. But it's a very interesting thing. Almost like a
Well, there are some physical limitations to an EMP. How powerful it can be and how widespread it can be in the high altitude electromagnetic pulse environment. But when you get to near effects or source region effects, you can get considerably higher field levels, and I suspect. I don't know anything about the field, but I suspect that that's the sort of thing that we're talking about is more close-in effects of particular weapons.
All right, here's a question I have for you that relates to everything taken out. Can a single detonation that's well placed with the proper magnitude or design to give the most powerful EMP pulse, if you had that properly placed and detonated, could one detonation take out the entire U.S. grid?
It is theoretically possible, and you're talking about the sort of the 1 second after that book scenario,
yep.
where you're more or less 400 kilometers above the central United States. It would indeed encompass most of the lower 48 power grid. I can go into a little bit of technical detail on that. The EMP itself is created when gamma rays from a nuclear blast occur as a matter of course of the physics of a nuclear blast. Those gamma rays will travel just like light, line of sight, and they'll hit the area of the atmosphere about 20 to 40 kilometers off of the ground. And in that region, that's where the gamma rays interact with the atmosphere, strip off electrons, and cause a widespread radio frequency pulse to occur. So if you're 400 kilometers high and you're trying to see line of sight an area 20 to 40 kilometers high, you would indeed cover the entire United States with a well-placed nuclear weapon. The other interesting fact is that EMP is notoriously unconcerned with how big the actual yield is. A 1 kiloton yield weapon is not going to yield 1% of the EMP of a 100 kiloton weapon. In fact, they're almost identical. There is a little bit lower EMP effect from a smaller weapon, but it's remarkably insensitive to the actual yield of the weapon. It's sort of any nuclear weapon will do. So certainly the third world countries and other unfriendly nations to the U.S. are capable of creating weapons that could create a devastating EMP effect in the United States.
So can you tune nuclear detonation to optimize the EMP effect even with a low yield detonation?
Well, to the extent that you can enhance gamma ray output of a nuclear weapon, you could theoretically do that. But like I said, any sort of enhancement and tuning, and it gets into the realm of classified technology, of which I have no specific knowledge. But I just want to.
Oh heck! I was hoping we could publish plans on our site.
knock on the door.
I'm not trying to say that there's something that I know that I'm not saying. I try to be as open as possible on all matters here because I know people are concerned about it. But I do know that that is the case. I haven't been involved in specific warhead development. My expertise is in the EMP effect and hardening. But it's important to know that when you're looking for this and you can't find information, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Put it that way.
Well, then, if that's the case.
About taking out the entire grid?
Well, yeah, that's what I meant. Let me pick that back up. So if somebody has hubris and says, "Oh, don't worry about it. One nuclear weapon couldn't take out the entire grid. Oh, that can never happen." Is that being a little bit too presumptuous?
That's being a little flippant. I don't agree with that. Certainly. the electronic devices that we have, we can argue there's some contradictory data on that. But one thing that we do know is that the impact on the power grid is going to be significant as the power grid now stands. Obviously, the private enterprise being the engine of the United States economic health, we have a lot of independent operating electrical power companies, and they don't all operate in the same rules. They don't all operate under the same guidelines. They're interconnected, so they have to have some compatibility. But to the extent that they actually implement EMP protection measures or solar storm protection measures, it's extremely hit and miss. I have consulted for some utility companies that are doing certain elements of hardening, and they're generally occurs when you have a champion of the cause directly in the upper management of a utility company. In general, these folks are trying to get as much revenue and return on the capital investment that they've made, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the challenge is to convince them that this is a problem. Nuclear proliferation is not going to get any less over time, and to convince them that these are the sorts of investments that they're going to need to make.
So, how many private held utilities do you think? You've got something going on back there. How many private utilities do you think out of the universe of utility companies in the U.S. are actually like that? They have someone championing the cause and actually making a positive attempt to harden their infrastructure.
I mean, I would guess that I don't have the full visibility, but I would guess that you wouldn't take you more than two hands to count them in terms of the HEMP effect. Now, most of them are looking at solar storms because that's a well understood and well understood phenomenon, and they focus generally on that. They have some operational things they can do. They have some technological things they can do. In the HEMP realm, some of the technology simply does not exist to protect certain elements of the grid. For instance, there's no technology commercially available at the moment that can protect a extremely high voltage 765 kV transformer. I hope to see that change in the very near future, but right now, utilities are faced with, I can't do anything about it, so I'm not going to worry about it.
Which, to me, is the scariest part of this whole threat, is the fact that there's only, a couple of thousand major transformers that fall in that 765 down to, 347 kilovolt level, that they only replace, 5 of those per year generally, and that's generally end-of-life program maintenance. They call ahead 18 months to a couple of years to say, we need to replace this one. So it's a very structured and methodical process. If you lost all of those transformers in one fell swoop, and they're all being made in Germany, and maybe China's making a few, I don't know. They're not being made here, are they? How would you ever just replace those, the major structure, your backbone, to even think about getting your grid back up after an event like that?
Within 12 months.
Yeah, within 12 months.
Well, you're absolutely right. It is a big concern. The surge production capacity of these things is not very great, and that's a big change between the nuclear tests of the 50s and 60s and today. We didn't have those widespread, very high voltage power distribution elements or power transmission elements. And so we really don't have a good feel for how those would fare in an EMP environment. And obviously, you've got in a hemp scenario, you've got the the E1 pulse that will couple energy in and hit the windings, and then you have increased stress from an E3 event, a geomagnetic disturbance that could finish the transformers off. So it's very troubling, and that is the biggest the biggest concern with a geomagnetic storm or an EMP event. How do you replace these things? That's the Achilles heel.
Let me ask you this: with your knowledge, is there any part of the current grid system that would in fact be protected or would be operational post hemp type event or solar?
Well, solar events, there's certainly been hardening that has occurred for that. I mean, you had mentioned in a previous episode about the Quebec power grid that went down in a recent solar storm, or the previous solar maximum. There are some obvious things that you can do. Put capacitors in the middle of the inline of the power grid to block DC. And there are some other things. I mean, John Kappenman has pioneered a lot of research in that end, and he's hands down the best guy to talk about geomagnetic storm hardening. And anybody who's looked into this has probably read his work.
Who is that again?
John Kappenman.
Okay.
And but the bottom line is that, to answer your question, I don't know of any part of the grid that is hardened to the level that you could have any assurance that the power transmission would be unaffected or largely unaffected by a hemp event. I don't think there is one.
Well, here's one of the myths. Well, some of the discussions I've had in forums about this issue, I get these comments as, "Oh, come on, the government has some power. The military's hardened. They would be able to fend off a hemp attack. They'd still be able to operate. They have their own power generation plants." I said, "Really? I don't know about that. Do you know of how well the military would fare? Will they still have power?" I just don't think that they don't. I don't think that I know of they run any kind of power plant and or have total hardened ability.
No, in fact, when you are designing a military EMP protected bunker, which I've done, you have to have generation capacity available on site. So just every command and control center also contains its own generation on site. That is not generation capacity that's going to be available for the general public or widespread. The military has a real vulnerability with the civil infrastructure in their bases that can be impacted by EMP events, just like everybody else.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Jake makes a great point here, because there's a current procurement effort that I've read about recently. I think it's about a $3 or $4 billion effort where they're concentrating on building microgrids that would be somewhat offsetting, against the loss of commercial power. So the military, at least in the States, currently view themselves as not being up to snuff.
Yeah, and the other thing is that how much? I mean, they're generating their own power. I'm assuming it's probably diesel generated backup. How much diesel do you think that the military has on store? How long can they go before they run out of diesel, assuming there's a hemp event and there's no way to really transport fuel after after that happens?
Well, that's a good question, and the vagaries of military logistics are no doubt in the war plans and probably classified. So, but it will take a substantial amount of diesel fuel to be available in most scenarios with command and control bunkers. You have an extended period of time, 30 days or more, of close storage where you can operate, and possibly even more. So the military, I'm convinced, will be able to weather and keep an effective deterrent force and an effective monitoring force during a hemp event. I'm not saying that they will not be impacted, but they've made the preparations because they know that they're definitely vulnerable.
Do we know that their typical vehicles, like a Humvee or personal carriers, personnel carriers, are those things EMP, quote unquote, EMP proof? Do they have electronic ECMs, that sort of thing, or have they designed them to be like the pre-1985 vehicles that they can run whether there's been an EMP or not, so that in the event of a hemp, you've got plenty of vehicles that military can at least get around and set up checkpoints or whatever and enforce the law?
Well, I do know that the vehicles, critical vehicles, battlefield vehicles are tested. Certainly ships, tanks. I can't answer specifically towards the Humvee, but I imagine they have tested them. And it's interesting to the characteristics of an EMP hardened vehicle. You would probably look at, if you were going to harden a stock vehicle, you would look at the wiring harnesses, putting EMI braiding on those, perhaps putting the electronic control units in, a conductive shield, a Faraday cage that's connected to the wire harnesses, and at the ends of the wire harnesses you would have very small leads that are unprotected, so that it limits the amount of energy that they would absorb. If I were designing a hardened vehicle, that's how I would do it, and I believe that that's what the military does. I know they do that for aircraft, and the principles are well understood, and they are effective.
Well, here's a speculation question. Assuming we had a 1 to 3 detonations and it took out a hemp detonation, it took out our entire grid, do you think that the government as we know it would still function, or what would you think it would look like post hemp? Because if you can't tell me what's going on, I'm assuming, like the story 1 second after in North Carolina where it was set in a small town, that there is no government because I can't talk to them and they can't talk to me.
Well, that's an interesting discussion. There are areas that are designated for continuity of government at the federal level, at state levels. This is something that FEMA's been encouraging. FEMA also has a program called the PEP program, where they put EMP protected infrastructure near AM radio sites so that mass communications can occur through hardened channels. So I think that at least there will be some partial communication to the citizenry, and I do believe that that government will function at some level. Now, can they deal with the logistics of large urban areas, with severe power outages and the impacts of that? It's hard to say. I would be skeptical if the entire force of the federal government can't handle what happened in New York in an effective manner. I don't think that there will be a limit to the chaos that is possible in an event, despite whatever planning has been taken has gone on before then.
Well, if you look at dumpster diving 2 days into Sandy for food, you can imagine that if it was nationwide, the only way you'd have a semblance of government is if you can go outside your door and you can go a couple of miles on your bicycle and see a military vehicle on a checkpoint or somebody patrolling. And I just don't think they have enough manpower to fan out. I would think they would probably start at D.C. and probably some of the areas where they have military bases. But if you're not close to one of those, they don't exist. That would be my opinion.
Well, I mean, you certainly, when you're looking at these kinds of scenarios, you have to develop the threats that you feel comfortable with. You're going to have some level of chaos. You have to decide what is the level of chaos that you're going to be prepared to deal with. I mean, that's how this business is done. If you're worried about a solar flare but not a HEMP, well, then that would cause you to take one set of actions. If you're worried about an HEMP but you think it's mitigatable, then that would be another set of actions. If you really don't know, and we don't have enough information to definitively say it's going to be one way or another, you've got to be ready for whatever the worst case scenario that you have in mind is. And so I agree with you. We're not going to know, and in wartime and emergencies, the best plans are generally ineffective. That's just.
Let me ask you a question here. Let's put yourself in the position that you're a general and you're in the Joint Chiefs circle, let's say, and the United States has experienced a widespread HEMP effect, and we're seeing that chaos similar to what we're seeing in the Revolution series. What would you think the likelihood would be that the Joint Chiefs would say it's time to pull all of our military, or the majority of our military assets and personnel from around the world back to the continental United States?
I'm just a humble engineer. Don't claim to be a military mind that would be even qualified to speak on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But logic dictates that at some point, if things aren't going so well at home, that you would want to consolidate. I believe that a number of scenarios, whether they be EMP related, whether they be financial issue related, will. I think the biggest impact, I think the United States is capable of being resilient. I don't have as much confidence in the rest of the world, frankly.
Well, if you look at what would happen after a hemp event, we lost the entire grid or the biggest part of it, you'd probably see, the statistics have stated that we would lose somewhere between 75 to 90% of our population would perish that first year. So out of 330 million Americans, you'd be down to about 30 million Americans to maybe 50 million Americans left over. If I was an enemy like China, or I was an opportunist like China, or even North Korea, I would think that I would just sit back after an event like that, wait for about a year, let the most of the population die off, and then you could kind of scoop in. And it would be a matter at that point is, can we even have a defensive force that could protect against an invading country if we're at that kind of scenario? We've lost most of our population.
Well, I think in the event of an HEMP grid down scenario, to the extent that states and localities have the ability to take care of the needs of the folks in their immediate areas, I'm not necessarily a subscriber to an HEMP being a mass extinction event, because I think there are too many ways to mitigate it in the near term. But I certainly can't say that I know for certain how things would go. It's a reasonable scenario that power is out for a year. Has a very bad effect on public health.
Well, I don't know. I think me and the engineer our eyebrows are going up just a bit on that one. Because we seem to think that because we are a just-in-time inventory society where everything that we want or need winds up being shipped to us just in the nick of time, like grocery stores only have about 3 days worth of inventory on their shelves. That's during regular, normal, sane business hours, versus if there were a blackout and never came back on, you could technically go through the inventory in about 6 hours probably, and there's no replacements coming. And like New York, where you have where some of these people had no transportation, they don't own a car. They were depending on cabs and subways, and the power's out. There's no restaurants open. The grocery stores were throwing their food out into a dumpster, the fresh food that was going bad. Those people were running out of food in just 2 days because they didn't prepare. And I think most people out there do not prepare to go much more than a week without food. I think it would get nasty really quickly, especially.
Well, I certainly agree that it'll get nasty. And I certainly don't mean to minimize the scenario that you lay out, but a 90% extinction event, I just think is probably unlikely. I'm not prepared to give an estimate. But I think certainly the weakest in society and those that are most dependent upon medical infrastructure would certainly be the most vulnerable, and it would be a significant event. But 90%, I have to believe that that we can avoid that much, but. That's not to say that an individual should not be prepared for the worst. I certainly don't want to be waiting in line for something that FEMA decides to give me or give a large part of the population in a way that causes more harm than good, like they were giving away gasoline in New York. So I don't disagree with you. I think we're just talking about the specific numbers of the end result.
Well, let me ask you this then: on a personal level, on a fear scale of say 1 to 10, and 1 is I have no fear at all about what would happen, and 10 I'm scared to death and I'm wanting to prepare. What is your personal fear factor about? Since you know so much about the EMP threat, does it haunt you? Does it bother you, or do you feel like it's like everything else? It's a black swan event. It's probably not going to happen, so I'm not worried too much.
No, it bothers me a lot on a personal level. I believe that we're at the cusp of dramatic proliferation of nuclear technology in this stage of the global economy, where there's a lot of threats to individual sovereignty, and countries think that the only way they can protect themselves against that is to obtain nuclear technology,
aka Iran.
AKA Iran, but countries like Argentina and Brazil and certainly in Japan and South Korea and other countries, smaller countries that have if Pakistan can produce a nuclear weapon, I think it's unreasonable to assume that technology will not proliferate around the entire Islamic world.
So let me ask you this on a personal level, and you may not want to answer this, but the engineer and I are average guys. We don't have any superpowers, but one of the things that we've done is we've both started preparing, canning food, stocking extra food, looking at ways to do, backup power if the grid goes down. It doesn't have to be a hemp event, but if you're prepared for hemp or solar, you could be prepared for Superstorm Sandy, a tornado, civil unrest, or whatever it may be. So do you tend to do some of those things that you hear that homesteading and preppers and some of these other terms that are used for people who are looking at a way to prepare their family for when those systems that we normally depend on are not there anymore?
Well, I mean, absolutely. As to specific things that I might be doing, I don't like to talk about it, but certainly where I live, hurricanes are not uncommon, and I have a generator that I can utilize in times that the power goes out, and it sustained me recently this summer for 4 or 5 days. Before that, it's been 9 days. it's one of those things that you really have to look at, especially in light of the solar maximum cycle, especially in light of things that can happen. I suspect that with decline of baseload coal plants, we're going to have a much more unreliable power grid than everybody's used to. Mm-hmm. So, absolutely, people should be looking at these things with a little bit of a different mindset, and be prepared to weather whatever scenarios that they have.
Well, this brings me right into one of the talking points we wanted to discuss is EMP. What can you do, the average citizen out there? Can you talk about some of the things we know that if there was a hemp event, nuclear event, that you could lose your electronics? It might be wise to store a few handheld radios, maybe an iPod with music on it that you could power through a small solar charger, things that would fit inside a Faraday cage, a laptop with how to live off the grid, that sort of thing.
Sure.
We've mentioned some of those things, but how can an average guy do that?
Well, there's a number of things. First of all, if you understand that shielding things is not necessarily the only way that you can deal with this. Logistical spares. If you've heard in some of the survivalist communities, two is one and one is none. So you have if you have a mindset that you have more than one way to take care of the things that are important, food, water, transportation, whatever it is. But certainly shielding against an EMP doesn't have to be the exclusive domain of the very rich. I've looked in the past somewhat in an amusing way at some of the YouTube videos of an EMP trash can, and the way that what I've seen on YouTube, it appears to me to be something that's going to be ineffective and maybe worse than nothing, because it gives a false sense of confidence. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, you know what? What if there's a way to make this actually work? And part of the exercise of discussing this with you guys, I'd had some ideas before, and I've improved on some potential methods of making this happen in an EMP trash can environment. First of all, in some of the YouTube videos, I've seen them put FM radios in, and they put the lid on, and they don't hear the radio anymore, or they hear static. Well, in a matter of scale, the EMP is so much greater energy than the levels that you're looking at with an FM radio possibly going to static, that it's not really a good test. It's something that you call dynamic range.
Well, that would be, if with that logic, you could say, I'll just hide under a bridge because I can't hear my FM radio when I drive under an overpass.
Exactly. So, but if you take the trash can EMP shield to
can
a
you,
little bit.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but can you explain what we're trying to do here? That we're really talking about is what's called a Faraday cage. Can you give a quick definition and why people are actually doing that stuff?
Okay, well, the only way to be sure that you can exclude damaging EMP energy from an enclosed space is to put and you can read this in the Mill Standard 188-125-1. They state it pretty explicitly that you need a highly conductive surface in all areas. That's pretty easy to do for a small area. A trash can provides a convenient size, but just putting a lid on a trash can isn't going to do it. But obviously not guaranteeing performance here, but I think it's put it in the better than nothing category, and might have some rudimentary effectiveness. If you were to take a steel wool, not the type of steel wool that you get on a Brillo pad, but something you might buy at the hardware store, and place that along the lip of a trash can. Put your stuff in first. Put the trash can lid on tightly over the fragments of steel wool, and then take some of that steel wool and put it along the sticky side of of duct tape or something along that line, and seal the edge of the lip of the body and the lid of the trash can with that. You would probably get a fair amount of hemp energy attenuation. The reason the just this stock trash can doesn't work in a EMP scenario is that you have two modes of propagating energy into a protected environment. One of them is the radiated part, which is where you have a hole or something and the energy radiates right into it. But the other one is conducted emissions, where something absorbed by the skin of the trash can will conduct underneath the lip, hit the corner of the trash can, the edge of it, and re-radiate, damaging energy potentially into your what you thought was a protected environment. So by putting steel wool, you're making the connection a little bit more robust, and you're making it so that you can have a little bit more of an expectation of shielding. So that would, if that's what I had to use, that's how I would do it. And but there's also other ways. You mentioned solar. I've been working with a couple of solar energy folks on developing hardened solar systems, and I'd be glad to share some information on that if anybody's interested in that. But
absolutely.
But basically, the biggest issue with solar installations, you've got solar panels that are sort of installed remotely, and you've got wires coming into an inverter charge controller. You've got batteries, and there's leads on that. If you're connected to the grid, you're connected. You've got the grid that's connected, and all the energy that's coming in there. So what you're faced with is how do you protect the charge controller and inverter from damaging EMP energy? And so creating a Faraday cage anywhere you've got a connection, an electrical connection, you have to use special filters to exclude damaging hemp energy. I generally recommend that you put, even though batteries themselves are not necessarily highly susceptible to an EMP, you're worried about them collecting energy and directing it into the charge controller. So sometimes it's easier just to enclose the batteries into some sort of a Faraday cage arrangement, provided the type of batteries that you've got can are compatible with that strategy in temperature and corrosive gases and the like. And so you put that together into a package, and you can get some level of EMP hardness. Nobody's done a lot of testing on the EMP hardness of solar installations. I hope to actually be involved in that one day in the not too distant future to get some information on that. But certainly, go ahead.
Let me ask you this. A solar panel in and of itself, let's say it's not connected to your inverter, it's not connected to the grid, it's stored in your warehouse. Will a solar panel in and of itself be damaged by hemp or solar?
Possibly, but will it be a complete failure? I don't know. The blocking diodes are generally reasonably robust semiconductor devices, and if they're not connected up to leads, it's hard to imagine that they would get a very large, a catastrophically failing energy absorbed into them if they're not connected. connect it to 100 feet of cable, and you've got a very large amount of energy that could potentially be involved. So
maybe it might be less expensive and to go with logistical spares where you have some spare panels and a spare inverter. Then when that stuff fries, you still got your batteries. You just replace your panels and replace your inverter, and you're back in business.
Well, and that's a very good point. At some point, you've got the trade-off of cost versus cost of mitigation versus cost of a spare. I think that is a definite workable strategy to throw some solar panels into perhaps an EMP container and be able to have some peace of mind that you're going to have some way to generate electricity in a grid down scenario. I would also advocate maybe you want to store some batteries, dry batteries, so that you could add distilled water and the electrolyte, so that you could have a longer term that type of a situation in that. But if you've got a working photovoltaic array, it would behoove you to have at least some level of spare panels and a spare inverter if you don't have any other alternatives. I've also been working.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, engineer.
Go ahead.
I think one of the things that's interesting when you look at the utilities, I've worked in that environment for a long time, and one of the keys that I see in this critical infrastructure is utilities have a significant spares inventory to begin with. So really in many ways, they're already there, except for just simply having some of those critical spares placed in Faraday cages. And to me, the economic impact of that is pretty small if you have that champion within the utility itself.
Achieving a little bit of EMP protection is not that much more difficult than achieving a lot, or less difficult. It's not that difficult to, as long as you're not trying to regularly build a room that you're going in and out of. If you're just putting a box together, having a completely sealed, completely welded box with a gasket around the lid, that's a workable scenario. And indeed assisted some folks in developing aluminum boxes that have gaskets that have a reasonably effective EMP protection. That done that through, and those boxes have been marketed through Hardened structures. I'm also looking at various other types of solutions. Like one of the things that I'm developing is a box where you can just roll a Costco, Home Depot, Lowe's type generator into, so that at the very least it wouldn't be operational. You would just store it in there. At the very least, you can roll that thing out, start it up, and at least have some level of electrical power available to you.
Either be the king or be the big target. Let me ask you this. Is there a market for a small consumer style box? Say something as big as a grill, the cavity of your backyard grill, or something along those lines. Do you think there would be a market for that kind of
I think there would be a market for it, but it all depends on how much is it going to cost. If you don't, if it costs a fair amount of money, then folks don't have a lot of money to invest in some of this.
I think it has to be in the $200-$400 range is my gut instinct for something that the typical consumer might be willing to spend.
Really comes down, I think, to the consumer's mindset, because on one perspective, they've spent a fortune on home insurance or car insurance, and you're thinking, an EMP Faraday cage is a one-time insurance investment that can be amortized over, 10 years. So a couple $100 divided over 10 years, you're talking nothing. But you have to plant that in their mind, though, and it's an education process.
Especially if you can authenticate that it actually works, because anybody can. I mean, we went to a self-reliance expo a couple months back, me and the engineer, and they were selling quote-unquote EMP bags. And they were actually static bags for, what, EMI? Or?
ESD, electrostatic discharge.
Okay, and they were calling it EMP bags, and people were buying them, and I think you figured out to take how many bags inside of each other?
Basically, the thing would only offer about 20-some dB of shielding effectiveness, and that does not meet the template required by mil standard 125.
No, it doesn't. You would certainly need. The problem with those bags is the seam. The seam is non-conductive, and I've seen those as well, and I have appropriate skepticism. But you can test that. Put your cell phone in it. See if you can still dial out, or call it up and ring it. That would give you an idea of the level of shielding. If you can dial up your cell phone in a bag like that, it's not going to work.
I think we tested that out, though. It actually did work.
It's a negative proof, though. You actually, if you can dial out, you prove that the bag's no good. But if you cannot prove that the bag is good under an EMP circumstance.
It's kind of like the microwave example. And I just think there's so many people out there hawking what I consider snake oil type Faraday cages. And the thing is, they just have to sell it to you, because once it happens, it only happens once, and they're not going to come beating down your door to get a refund.
Lifetime guarantee.
That's right. That's right. And that is a, caveat emptor, as they say. You need to make sure that the efforts that you're undergoing have some reasonable expectation of being effective. Because otherwise it's worse than nothing.
I also see that a lot of people out there talking about, well, I've got this Faraday cage, and when I'm not using my ham radio, I'm going to put it in there. Or when I'm not using my iPod, I'll put it in there. That's really an erroneous. That's rolling the dice, because how sure are you that the EMP is not going to hit when you're using your ham radio?
If you're using it, 10% of the time, and it's in there 90%, then you got 9 shots out of 10 that just by random happenstance that you're going to be okay. But 1 chance out of 10 that you're hosed.
That's why I think you really just need to back up products that you can put in there, items that you can say, okay, that's just my insurance policy. It's an extra netbook laptop that I paid $125 for, and just put it in there and leave it. So I think
when you replace your laptop, you put that in and you buy yourself a new one, and you replace maybe just a little early. So
sure.
Well, like anything, you've got to make sure that your devices, periodically you have to check them to make sure that they're functional. You don't want to, and it's very easy to forget about something that you put away in a container that may not be easy to. Yeah, exactly. And so it's that there are pluses and minuses to that. But the logistical spares certainly should be part of your scenario for EMP protection, because the EMP protection is basically statistical in nature. Military grade hardness can give you some 99% plus expectation that you're going to survive.
Are any of the nuclear power plants hardened, do you know? And what would be the likelihood of any kind of catastrophe if there was a grid down situation? I always thought that those things were designed to automatically put the rods back in the cooling situation if the power goes down.
Well, I don't have any specific expertise on that field, but I do believe that these nuclear power plants can be operated manually to a certain extent, as long as they've got power to be able to run some of the pumps. That's the main issue. I think some of the mediation measures. I mean, obviously, the second you drop all the rods down to cool the thing off, it doesn't happen right away. It takes quite a bit of time for the heat to drop off. So
you're producing a gigawatt.
There's reason to be concerned.
Are there anything about EMP or solar that we haven't talked about? You think, wow, he really should have asked me this question, and he hasn't.
Well, there's a it's a complicated systems engineering thought process that you have to go through. The issue is real, the concern is real. If you believe that nuclear proliferation is not something that we need to be worried about, then maybe you shouldn't worry about EMP. But I think that's a no-brainer. That we're going to have more countries with nuclear weapons, not fewer.
So, what do you think about this theory of how, quote unquote, easy it would be to send us back to the Stone Ages? Something like Iran's been shooting off their Shahab missiles, which are high altitude missiles, and they keep blowing up, and we keep laughing and saying, "Hey, look, epic fail," unless you were profiling that as the perfect EMP weapon. You take a small nuclear device, like you said, it doesn't have to be super high powered. Stick it on the end of a Shahab missile, put it in a freighter, shield the freighter so there's no radioactivity signature, float it about 200 miles off the coast of the U.S., open up the hatch doors, fire it off. About 6 minutes later, we're back to a little house on the prairie.
Well, I mean, I don't know that's realistic that we'd go to Little House on the Prairie, but it's certainly among the potential scenarios that can occur. And when you mentioned the Shahab missile, what worries me as much as the missile is that if they take it the extra step and are able to launch satellites, because that's a much more troublesome scenario. If they were to orbit a small nuclear device under the guise of it being a satellite, that could be that you could have that re-enter the atmosphere directly over the United States and detonate at a optimal altitude with far less warning than you might have with a freighter.
Sounds like it's happening right now in the background there.
A nuclear cappuccino.
Yeah. So also, we'll go back to the show here for a second, because some of these people may have tuned out a long time ago that watched the show for the entertainment value. Besides solar and EMP, can you think of any theoretical way that power could be taken offline, man-made, by some man-made device, or super collider, or open a micro black hole, or nanobots?
Well, I prefer to think that if that simpler is probably more likely, and I believe it was the director of the FERC just the other day came up with an announcement that hey, they're concerned about terrorist teams armed with rifles taking out major substations. He said that out in the clear. I was a little bit surprised about that, but he did. It's out in the public domain now, and I think that's a far more likely scenario than a physics anomaly a la revolution.
We're just trying to preserve our integrity for future podcasts.
Absolutely.
If we can figure out a way, and of course they're going to probably disclose it sooner or later. But they did say they talked to a physicist. They brought him in and pitched their idea of why the power went off, and the person lit up with excitement and saying, wow, this is not only possible, it's plausible. And I don't know who that physicist was. Maybe it was Dr. Michio Kaku, or I don't know. But we still don't know what that reason is, and they haven't released it yet. So, and like we say, until they jump the shark, we're still going to be podcasting in the dark.
well, I will fall back on my I'm just a humble electrical engineer, and I'll leave those sorts of things to the physicists. I'd be happy to read about it, but I haven't seen anything that leads me to believe that that's even remotely possible, frankly.
Well, Davidson, I really thank you for coming on our show today. Can you give us, is there anything that if any of our listeners out here could use or need your service, is there a service that you would be able to offer to any of, I mean, who knows who's in our audience? We may have some hardcore preppers who want an underground bunker or an EMP Faraday cage or some other consulting you might offer. What can you offer, and can we help promote you?
Well, I've certainly done my fair share of consulting to private clients. I also have done an awful lot of pro bono discussion with folks that are simply concerned about the issue, and I don't mind doing that as my schedule allows. But I'd be more than happy to discuss the issue with anybody who's particularly interested. If they're interested in, I'm a capitalist like anybody else. I'm interested in, helping people, but maybe making a little bit of money along the way. But certainly, my priority is to get factual information out there and letting people decide what it is that they feel they need.
So when you say a private client, are you talking about maybe, say, an individual that says, hey, I'm building a new home, I want to do some extra preparedness, come in and consult and tell me what I need to do? Or are you talking more like private companies?
No, exactly right. Private individuals. If you're building a new house, for instance, it's far cheaper to integrate some sort of EMP protection into your electrical system, into your, if you have off-grid power, or if you even have an EMP hardened space in your house. It's easier to do it when you're designing it and building it than it is to retrofit. Retrofit's the most expensive way to do it.
Absolutely, and I think one of the other key points is to bring you in early in the process, not when they're pouring concrete and that sort of thing.
Exactly.
So you're more like an EMP architecture. Spec the project up front and say this is the kind of materials you might want to use. And does this take a financially well-endowed individual, or is this something that's out of the scope of the average home buyer that might be out there?
It depends on what they want, but I'm working on some of those, and I have worked on a lot of them in the past. I've worked on them for individuals who were well-heeled and some that were not so well-heeled. And I've worked with a whole spectrum of clients in terms of just giving them enough information so that you soothe their fears on certain aspects.
Well, how can our listeners, if they want to contact you, do you have a website, email? How would they get in contact with you? What's the best way to contact you?
Best way to get in touch with me is via email, and I can be reached at Davidson, Davidson, at EMAG, EMAG-Associates.com. It stands for Electromagnetics Associates, but and that's the company that I work through. I would certainly be amenable to working with you guys to get additional information out there as necessary, and I appreciate the opportunity to just come on here and talk about the subject, and try to get some possible ideas where regular folks like you and me can can give some possible scenarios and mitigation measures.
Okay, we would like to have you back on in future episodes where maybe we have a specific question we'd like to have answered, and bring you back on for 2 or 3 or 4 minutes and answer that question. Maybe be on our board of Brain Trust.
Yeah,
if you'd be willing to maybe do that.
more than happy to do it anytime for you, and it's been a pleasure, and I like what you're doing. I know you've got a purpose in life to discuss the show Revolution, and but there are interesting aspects, and you guys are very well informed. I congratulate you.
Well, I appreciate that, and thanks for the kudos. We very much enjoy the expertise you shared. You cleared up a lot of the myths. I think you gave people a lot of good information that they can at least start to think about the actions that they can take on their own, in their own home, in their own community, and maybe even use this information to spark the incentive to go out and lobby for the political side of things. You know, contact your congressman or senator and say, wow, we're left open, or go to your local utility and see if they're one of those champions, or turn them into a champion. So Davidson, we appreciate your time on the air today. You've been a great guest, and we look forward to having you back in the future.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it.